that we are ready to go. And accordingly, I'd like to go ahead and start off today's webinar. Again, my name is Tom Scott. I am the Executive Director of SC Cyber, and this is part of our fall webinar series. Some of you may have joined us today expecting to hear words of wisdom from Tab Clardy, our colleague in the FBI. We will have Tab joining us on December 8th. Our speaker today filling in for Tab is Mark Lester. Mark is the Chief Information Security Officer at the South Carolina's State Ports Authority. We should be demonstrating and showing on the screen some of his credentials and background. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the microphone over to Mark and let him begin with his presentation, which he graciously agreed to talk to us about information sharing analysis organizations, or ISAOs. I'm not sure whether he pronounces it the same way, but I will turn this over to Mark, and we're going to get started.
Thank you, Tom. I'm Mark Lester, like Tom said, with the State Ports Authority, into my third year of that, and coming from a long time of DoD contracting, doing cybersecurity and data integration. But the topic today is ISAOs, Information Sharing and Analysis Organizations. Now, have y'all gone over anything like that at all? Okay, so I'm not sure who has heard of those. They're relatively new, but I'll tell you a couple of stories to get into that and why it means so much and can mean so much for essentially any community. A number of years ago, I lived in England, wife and small child, toddler, and one day I'm at work and my wife gets a phone call, and it's a lady in the village we lived in. She said, bring little Sarah down to playgroup. Little Timmy's got chicken pox, and they're all going to run around the room, get hot, and have fun, and all drink from the same cup. My wife's a nurse, and she's like, what are you doing that for? We get vaccinations for chicken pox. Well, at the time in England, they didn't do that. So the communities took care of themselves. They took care of all the kids. When one child got chicken pox, they brought them all together, had them share a common cup, so all of them got chicken pox, because at an early age, chicken pox is a pretty easy disease to deal with. At the same time, all the adult males who had never had chicken pox growing up, they leave the town for a couple of weeks while the disease runs its course, because sterility and death are a couple of the outcomes of chicken pox for adult males. Neither one of those is particularly enjoyable. So keep that in the back of your mind, how communities take care of themselves. A few years ago, you're probably familiar with the Target Corporation breach. The breach didn't happen by someone picking Target as the target and walking in the front door. They went through a trusted third party, heating and air, compromised his machine, and then used his connection into Target to do the lateral movements and finally get to the ultimate target and capture the information that they wanted. They did that very effectively, and they usually do. The point that you should take from that is that it's the supply chain that is oftentimes the vector through which a threat agent will come through. So supply chain security. When I got to the port a couple years ago, there was an economic study done by the Darla Moore School of Business, and they reported that in rough numbers, directly or indirectly, the State Port Authority, which is about 500 people, impacts about 10% of the state's gross domestic product. That's a fairly significant part for a small company of 500 people, 10% of the state's GDP, but also about 10% of the state's employment is directly or indirectly impacted by the Port Authority as well. And I thought that's really great. pat yourself on the back and never say that in public again, because that, from my perspective, that makes me a huge target. So one of the other things in that report, or in maybe some of the marketing materials we have, showed that one of our, we've got so many different industries that feed the port or help the port do what we do. We've got more than 150 plus trucking companies. We've got brokers and just a number of different verticals that come together, probably about 18 or 20 of them that come together to make this whole logistics thing work through maritime. Well, there's a information sharing and analysis center concept which has been around for probably 15 or 20 years. Financial services in ISAC is where your Bank of America and Wells Fargo and Visa and MasterCard all get together and share information about cybersecurity threats. That's pretty interesting. And then a couple years ago, Tom invited me to represent the state for the multi-state ISAC convention out in San Antonio. So I went out there and I thought, well, this is pretty cool. I can join that. So that helps the Port Authority. But I've got 150 plus trucking companies, and they're not state, so they can't belong to the multi-state ISAC. What do they belong to? Well, they could join land transportation. Okay, but I can't join that because I'm not land transportation. So how do I get the ability to get information sharing from these different vertical silos that the ISACs essentially live in? Because there's ISACs for airports and legal and insurance and obviously financial services, multi-state. There's just a lot of verticals that are taking care of themselves. And the information they're sharing is not corporate proprietary information. Even the security guys, McAfee and Palo Alto and Sophos and guys like that get together and share threat information. Not how they protect against it, but that the fact that they found something new, then they all go to their respective corners and protect against that their own particular way. Again, it's that community taking care of itself. Right after 9/11, Charleston was selected to be a proof of concept for a fusion center, and we had Project Seahawk stand up. And that's an interagency operations center that brings in federal, state, local, police, fire, rescue, emergency, just all kind of physical security professionals that share information because they're all co-located in the same location. So when something's happening in one area and happens to transport itself into another jurisdiction, you don't have to make a call from one dispatch to another. They're already on it and responding to it. It works very well. And the relationships are the biggest thing that I think we get out of that Seahawk capability that we have here in Charleston and the other fusion centers around the country. The funding for that was eventually taken away, but the local captain of the port, Coast Guard captain, said, no, this has still got to continue because I need this capability. So on any given day, you walk into Seahawk down here, and there's probably a dozen or so people. And they all know one another and talk with one another. And every couple of weeks, we have a meeting with probably, 50 to 100 people in there. But when there's a major event, we had a dirty bomb scare here a couple of months ago. Instantly, there's well over 100 people in there working and coordinating and collaborating, and everything just works extremely well. Case in point, that dirty bomb, we had a recent captain of the port change here, and oddly enough, that happened midnight on his first day. Welcome to Charleston. It's probably not the event that he was hoping for. But as an after action comment, he said he couldn't think of any better place to be the way everybody just ran to their spot and did exactly what they were supposed to do, and everything is just well coordinated. So those relationships that have been built over time allow us to be very effective in how we deal with physical security things. So let me try to tie all of that together for this information sharing and analysis organization, ISAO. You've got communities that are taking care of themselves, and that's based on relationships. We've got physical security with Seahawk, and those are relationships. We've got a port capability for transportation and logistics that is extremely important, and not just for the state. A couple of other things I didn't mention for that is we have trucks coming on and off, containers coming on and off terminal every day from about 26 states, which is more than half. Fairly significant. We have an inland port in Greer, South Carolina, right by BMW, so that makes sense. But one of the other reasons we selected Greer was because within 1 day's drive from Greer, South Carolina, there's about 90 to 95 million end users, consumers. So that's about 30% of the U.S. population. So our marketing tag is 29 days from Shanghai to Charleston, 1 day from Charleston to Greer, and 1 day from Greer to 30% of the U.S. population. It's a pretty strong business case for why we wanted people to use the Port of Charleston. It also makes us fairly significant if someone wants to poke Charleston or South Carolina or the Southeast or the United States in the eye. Charleston would be a good place to do that. Another fact of Charleston is it's one of 13 strategic ports that have been identified by the government because of our capability to load and send materials to a war front if need be, making it that much more critical that we keep things up and running and free and clear, so transportation into and out of the port is unimpeded at all. So how do we get this very important location and capability secure when you have so many disparate industries working together, hand and foot, day in and day out? In December 2015, President Obama signed an executive order, I think, creating an ISAO, Information Sharing and Analysis Organization, where the ISACs were vertically oriented around a particular industry. The ISAO says, include in your information sharing and analysis thing whatever you want to share with that makes most sense. So for me, it makes most sense for the maritime industry to share amongst the truckers and trains and Coast Guard and SLED and FBI and Customs and Border Protection. And there's just like I said, 18 to 20 different verticals that we're trying to have work together. And when you take that third-party vector into account, and there was a report recently, I can't remember the exploit that caused it to start up, but the report came out and it said, well, when these guys get in, and they will, this is how they escalate privileges, and this is how they move laterally through your organization. But one of the other parts that I thought was most important in that analysis was the fact that there are typically multiple targets. There's the intended target, and there is a staging target. And the staging target is usually one that's less protected. And they come in and compromise that organization with the ultimate goal of using that trusted connection into the intended target. Well, that to me just screams supply chain security, and especially in an area where I've got so many different industries that are most of them, like everybody, is cash strapped, and nobody can afford cybersecurity guys because they're all expensive and they want to spend a lot of money, and they bring no money into the business. They take it out very effectively. But we can also stop that money from that impact, that negative impact from happening if we put the right things in place. So if I get my thought is if I get my supply chain more secure, then I'm more secure. And likewise, I am also the supply chain for everybody that I rely on. They rely on me just as well. So that makes sense to me, to gather all of that together and put it in a place, in a capability where we've got a central location that's looking out for what's happening in our community, so that if anything alerts, if we have an indicator of compromise, that while the entity that's been compromised can begin to work on fixing that, all of the rest of the entities in our community can go ahead and plug the firewall or patch or add whatever mitigation we need to make sure that we won't be adversely affected like our partner is. With that information sharing, sometimes it's attributed to someone if they so choose to share that information, or sometimes it's not attributed at all. It's just one of our partners is experiencing a problem. It's on port whichever, and block that port. And that's really all I really need to know, is that someone's having a problem, and I just don't want it to come across my threshold into my organization. Or likewise, if I'm having a problem, I don't want that to transmit over into somebody else's organization. So in a large nutshell, that's information sharing in an analysis organization. There's obviously more to it than just a technical capability of sharing the network traffic that might have the indicators of compromise. There's a whole education and awareness component for that. I'm not advocating buying the shiny box and putting it in the corner so everything's fine now. There's that whole training and awareness layer that needs to be taken care of, almost the layer 8 firewall, your end users. The end users are far and away 90-95%. It's usually a phishing attempt that gets the initial foothold into an organization. So when you can get your end users to do the right thing all the time, it's a good day. And I think that's a day when you don't have any end users, because almost always, they're going to click on something, because the phishing attempts that we get are very, very targeted and very, very professionally done. That it's hard to discern right from wrong sometimes. So the ISAO has not only the technical component, but the awareness and training, and obviously some of the governance things. While we're not mandated for any governance from a state or federal position yet, there are certain things that just make good business sense, best practices in the industry. You should have a business continuity plan. You should have, password rules and guidance on how to create good, strong passwords. And users should be taught not to click on links or open documents that they're not aware of the origin for those. There are a number of policies and procedures that need to be in place, and there's so much of that information that's available through all the different security organizations like SANS and a number of other ones. A lot of good templates out there that we can use to share centrally from the ISAO, so that all the organizations that come in and join are then able to begin to get their program up a little bit better, without necessarily having to hire without every one of those 150 trucking companies and everybody else we have in the organization, in the community, having to hire a cybersecurity guy. Cybersecurity, as you're probably well aware, is going to be woefully unfilled, a number of jobs. So the more that we can spread that capability across communities without everybody having to hire their own cyber guy, the better off we're going to be. As long as we continue to make some progress in doing the things that we need to do those basic cyber hygiene things that you've probably heard so much about, patching the OS and automatic updates and antivirus and a firewall, and review the firewall rules, and again, training and awareness and testing. I test members at the port with phishing campaigns every month. And our initial campaign, we had well over a 20% click rate, which is horrible. And a lot of organizations have greater than that almost on a regular basis. Ours are down into single digits, low single digits mostly. And a couple weeks ago, when the bad rabbit problem cropped up that was being distributed through a flash update, I sent out a real quick phishing campaign saying, hey, your flash is out of date, update it here. And it all looked extremely just like you'd see from Adobe. And out of the more than 500 emails I sent out, I had only 12 initially click on it and say, yeah, I think I probably need to do this. Then they looked at it and thought, no, I don't need to install that at all. So I effectively had a 0 click rate across 500 employees, more than 500 employees, and which I think was extraordinarily great. I kept looking at the numbers, trying to figure out what did I miss. Somebody had to click on this somewhere. But that was a very excellent test. So that's basically information sharing and analysis in a nutshell. So a way to do questions or?
Yes, we do have the ability to do questions and answer. For anybody that would like, you can use your chat window to ask questions. So we're going to go ahead and open up the chat window and see whether we have any questions coming in. Okay, I don't see any so far. Let's open this up to our colleagues in Clemson. Anyone on campus questions for our speaker, Mark Lester, on information sharing and analysis organizations? You guys have the mic.
I don't think we have any questions.
Okay, thank you for letting us know. I'm going to give us another minute here while we look through the chat content. Mark, I have a question for you. We've moved from a concept of ISAC to ISAOs. What do you think is really the difference between what we traditionally have called an ISAC and an ISAO? And how can you explain that to an end user that may not be in the same swim lane as we are?
So the difference for someone who understands ISACs, an ISAO is essentially, to me, a horizontal. An ISAO is a horizontal ISAC. It cuts across the industries that I need to share information with to best protect myself and likewise them. How do you explain that to someone who doesn't understand the information sharing and analysis concept at all? It is very difficult because typically when you say information sharing, what they see is, well, oh my gosh, these people are going to see all of my emails and all of my documents and all of my marketing strategies and advertising rates and contracts. It's nothing like that at all. What we're looking to share is just that traffic that is not normal, that traffic that looks like it is, that has a malicious intent and could be an indicator of a compromise. Um, when the business leader gets that, it's almost like the Charlie Brown Christmas show, a Lucy Schroeder moment when Schroeder plays Jingle Bells, just plinking on the piano, and Lucy shouts, "That's it!" When they get it, and it's this is exactly the capability I need. This provides me security that I'm not getting right now. Because one of the concepts that is eye-opening to a lot of people is the fact that cyber and IT are not the same. They're not the same at all. They're two totally different industries. Cybersecurity is basically risk reduction or risk management. IT is making the computers work for the company. Cyber is there to make sure that you know what risks there are, and you can either accept them or mitigate them away. And the ISAO allows you to do that across a community rather than just internally focused.
Okay. So Randy Clayton has asked a question, and Mark, that is, how hard is it for a network manager like yourself to set up training and testing that you've implemented in your job? What have been some of the challenges?
For the awareness training?
I think the awareness training is probably a good place to start.
So that was extremely easy. I hire that out to a service. I don't know if you want to name it or not.
If you want to tell us who you're using, we're glad to.
I use KnowBe4. KnowBe4 is out of Florida. They have Kevin Mitnick as their chief hacking officer, probably. Kevin Mitnick, if you're not aware, you probably ought to look it up. He's got a real interesting story. One of the FBI's first most wanted cyber guys. And that was probably when he was 16 or 17, back at a time where hacking was making free phone calls, which most people don't understand because phone calls are free, right? But we used to have to pay for all of that. And but anyway, he was eventually caught and did his time, and now he's doing his thing on training, which is mostly revolves around social engineering, which is the phishing aspect and the just buddying up to somebody in the smoking area or at the bar, or holding the door open for somebody because they've got a burden of packages, and now you let this guy in who looks like a UPS guy, but he's not really the UPS guy. He's got a little USB thing he's going to put in the back of somebody's computer somewhere. But the training videos are extremely well done. He does a very good job of explaining the social engineering aspects and how the tricks to be aware of. But on top of that, they provide you the capability to do monthly or more frequently phishing campaigns where everybody in the organization gets something a little bit different. So it's not, hey, did you get that thing from Mark? No, everybody got something from somebody else. It never comes from me. It never comes, well, some of them come from the portauthority.com email, but they're not, it's not a valid email. So they're really tricky. But it's done very well. It's very easy to implement, very easy to roll out, and very, very cost effective from my perspective.
Okay, thank you. Mark, of the ISACs and ISAOs out there, is there one or two you think that are doing an exceptional job that other ISAOs or ISACs should follow or mirror?
So the financial services ISAC is, I think, the I don't know, the big dog, and they're the ones that usually help everybody else set things up. And I actually went to them to have them help me set up an ISAO, which they offered to do at a price that was unreasonable. So I passed on that offer. The multi-state ISAC is the one I'm most familiar with because we belong to that. We get a lot of great services out of that. I can join for free, awesome, and I get a 24/7 CERT, computer emergency response team, awesome. I cannot afford to not spend no dollars on that at all, so I do. And plus there's some pay for services that I get on top of that. And I'm actually looking to the ISAO that we're standing up to follow that model to the greatest extent possible. As far as the other ones, I know there's a maritime ISAC, and it's mostly focused on international ocean-going vessels, and its website hasn't been updated since 2011 or 2012, so I would say that they're not very active at all. There are some other ISAOs that are seem to be focused on gathering lots of high visibility clients, but it kind of fails if you're looking at it from my perspective, which is the community protection aspect of it. So they're focused on national and international. I'm more focused on local. Once I get the local done, we can do national pretty quick. It's just copy paste across the world. That would be that.
So, Mark, when you look at ISAOs, it sounds to me like they can be sector specific or geographic area specific. And it sounds to me like the work that you're doing with the Port of Charleston is both of those. So you are being sector specific in working with maritime, but you're being geographically specific because you're focusing on Port of Charleston.
Correct. Well, so the ISAO concept is join in membership those that you need to join with. And so what makes sense to me is those that I do business with. But it's not just, we've already begun stepping beyond the maritime community and bringing in, there's several insurance companies that are interested in participating, several banks, several law firms. So all of a sudden we're branching into other entities that realize, hey, we participate in this, and the insurance piece is actually really interesting because I think you can easily make the case that if I can clearly delineate some protective measures that I have in place and detective measures that show that I am looking actively, that's going to make me have a lot less risk of having to file a claim with, a business loss claim with an insurance company. So I can take the fact that I have a stronger security posture to an insurance company, and if they understand that, I can get better rates because they're going to have less loss to have to deal with.
And to echo that, just last week we saw a presentation that was from a cybersecurity company that had partnered with an insurance company, and they were offering levels of certification. So level 1, level 2, or level 3, and I'm sure level 3 costs significantly more than level 1. But they had partnered with an insurance agency, and if you carried your certificate level 1, 2, or 3 to that insurance company, they would give you discounts in the premiums that you had to pay. So I think the concept you just shared there, we're actually seeing in practice. So, Mark, one of the cool things about working for the port, and you touched on this a minute ago, is it's not just a national flavor. You guys have an international flavor. I believe it was in June, maybe July, we had something related to ports and ransomware or Petya or something along those lines. And there were major ports in Europe that were shut down and impacted. What did we learn here in South Carolina and the Port of Charleston from that episode?
So that's not Petya, and Maersk was particularly targeted with that. What I took from that, and I talked with some of the cyber guys from Maersk, that was a 90-minute attack, and that 90-minute attack took them. They were offline pretty quickly, and for many days, and they're still recovering from that. Even though that's months ago, because a lot of that information that was encrypted was not recoverable, and so that has to all be rebuilt. And so you've got invoices and all kind of contracts and communications going back and forth. Everybody's still trying to rebuild that. So everybody is in the mode of either not having paid or not having been paid for work that they've done for keeping those goods flowing. We recognized that was going on pretty quick, probably within the 90 minutes that it was happening to Maersk, and we were able to obviously protect ourselves. But then, because we've got a good, strong working relationship with them, we were able to work communications through alternate methods to make sure that we could get the information we needed to move containers on and off ships and on and off the port to keep their containers flowing. But that started in the Ukraine, and you think, yeah, okay, big deal. So Maersk has one of the major has the major market share in the Black Sea there. The Ukraine is right there on the Black Sea, and the Ukraine at the time was in their tax season, and the ME doc, that application that had the initial exploit, is the equivalent of our TurboTax or Quicken. So it's, to me, and I don't have any facts to back it up, but it just makes perfect sense that it's a supply chain attack. You know, the smaller guys are going to use the TurboTax. Maersk isn't going to use TurboTax, for crying out loud. They're an international company. But I'll bet you 80% of their trucking companies do. And it only takes one to download that and update their files and then send the invoice to Maersk, and then they're in. So it's very, very fragile. It's very easy to get into your intended target, unfortunately.
Okay. Mark, any resources that you would like to share with anyone relating to information sharing analysis organizations, or how to get started?
Well, that would be good there. What's that?
They're not seeing it. You have to tell them.
Yeah, well, I can't see it.
Got it. So one of the to help Mark answer that question, and we'll get ready to wrap up here. There is an ISAO standards organization that's been stood up that works with a variety of organizations that want to do information sharing, helping them develop standards, helping create some rules and some parameters with which to maintain and operate your ISAO, as well as some guidance and some learning documents on how to get one stood up. So, Mark, any last words here as we get ready to wrap up?
So, sure. Obviously, look at that organization and the documents they have, but also look at the originating documents, the presidential directive that started all of that, and just make sense of what capabilities exist and what should exist, and how best to implement that for your specific segment in order to make sure that you're got the right players in the ISAO.
Okay. All right. I think that's going to wrap up this Friday's webinar. We want to thank our guest speaker, Mark Lester from the South Carolina Ports Authority, And we want to look forward to next Friday, where we will have Leo Chavez from EITS, Enterprise IT Solutions out of Charlotte, coming to talk to our students about threat hunting. And then we will wrap up after Thanksgiving with Barry McIntosh at the Savannah River National Laboratory. And our final speaker for the fall lecture series will be Special Agent Tab Clardy with the FBI and the Columbia Field Office. So with that, I will wish everyone a happy Friday and a great weekend. And we're going to go ahead and finish up. Thank you so much. We'll see you next Friday.